Chances are, if you're listening to this, that you are wanting to learn how to be more effective as a leader with people and many other things in your professional work. It turns out there are better ways to learn faster. On today's show, 10 ways to learn faster from a unique perspective that will get us all thinking on how to develop new skills. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 205.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. Yes, you can lead, and this weekly show at the intersection of business and education will help you to do exactly that. And if you've listened to this show for any length of time, you know that I am a big believer in learning new things, learning new skills, and that really is the call for all of us as leaders. If we want to lead and influence, we need to be able to learn new skills. And we can learn how to make education easy, but real learning actually isn't easy. In fact, it's a struggle most of the time. And today, I'm bringing a conversation to you that I think will be really helpful to all of us. It's certainly been something I've been thinking about over the last 3 to 4 months because I've been working on learning a new skill, and it's not a new skill that I'm good at. It's one that I have to work hard at, and that is learning how to play the guitar. And my guitar instructor, Randy Willhite, and I were talking just a few weeks ago, and I thought that it would be really interesting for us to take a look at learning a new skill like guitar, but more importantly, to look at some of the principles that come around with learning something new like guitar, but really are applicable for just about any skill, and to talk about how we can learn from them in order to become more effective. And so I am really thrilled to be able to welcome Randy here to the show. Randy, welcome to Coaching for Leaders.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I am. This is a very different guitar lesson than we normally do.
Yes, it is.
So
it's a lot easier on the fingers.
Easier on the fingers, maybe a little more challenging on your mind. I get the easy part this time because I get to be more of the coach, I suppose. But you've actually been a coach for me over the last 4 or 5 months because I'm trying to learn how to play guitar, and 10 or 11 years ago, I dabbled with it a little bit. But I've wanted to get better just to play for the family and play for our kids. And I've discovered, I think, at least 10 different principles of learning along the way. And I thought it'd be fun to have you comment on some of these, just things you've seen me do, but also just how, when you're working with people to learn a new skill, might be relevant. So you ready to jump in?
Let's go.
All right. So let's look, first of all, here at the first one. It's hard to start, but it's easier to keep going. So I discovered this along the way. I think it was probably the first session or so, Randy, you had said, get some time for 15, 20, 25 minutes a day to sit down and to practice guitar. And I started off by sitting down and putting my timer on and trying to practice and making sure I'd hit 20 or 25 minutes. And what I figured out was that wasn't the struggle for me at all. Once I sat down and did it, I would spend 15, 20, 30 minutes, sometimes even more than that practicing. It was actually the sitting down part that was more of the challenge. Do you find that with students a lot, that it's more of the actually getting to the practice time, regardless of what they're trying to learn, than it is actually spending the time doing it?
Everybody's a little different. It depends on... some people are more driven to, they want to play and they want to get good really quickly, so they don't have that big a problem with it. But most people, because of their schedules and other things, that can be an issue. And I know for myself in other areas that habits are really easy to have take hold of you. And they can be negative or positive. And if somebody gets in the habit, it's very easy to get in the habit of, let's say, well, I've got something to do today. I'm not going to play the guitar. I don't have time for it today. In a few days, that can become a negative habit where it gets easier and easier just to find reasons you don't have time to go do it. On the other hand, if you can force yourself initially to set aside a specific time or whatever works for you and stick to it, before you know it, that habit takes hold, and it's a positive habit because it keeps you coming back and gives you a chance to make progress.
Yeah, I've absolutely found that to be true. When I've got the habit going, I'm doing pretty good. When I let it fall off, then all of a sudden it's really hard to get back in the saddle.
It's almost universal with my students over the years that if I see my students typically once a week. The ones that I see every once in a while, if somebody's sick or they have to cancel a lesson and they have 2 weeks to practice, what I find is they do less in the 2 weeks than they would have in one, because in the back of their mind, they're thinking, oh, he's not coming this week. And then that habit turns into the next day. And before they know it, here he comes. But a whole 2 weeks has gone by and not much has happened.
I've totally done that a few times. You and I have missed a lesson for a week.
It happens with a lot of people. A lot of my students do that.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how we have more time and yet we do less with it because we don't have the consistency. Fascinating. All right, so one of the other things I've learned here, number 2, is memorize first, then practice. You called me on this a few times, and because I was working on trying to learn the music, and I still am because I'm trying to get out of this habit, but I would like try and learn the music as I'm playing it, as I'm practicing it. And you've suggested to me a few times, memorize it first. Get the stuff down in your brain first, and then actually go and try to do the practice. Why approach it that way? What's the value if you're trying to do something for the first time?
It's just that when you're a beginner or an intermediate player and you're struggling, which everybody does at that stage, there's so many aspects to playing that are difficult. There's the rhythms that your brain is trying to remember. There's a myriad of different rhythms going on through a song, and it takes a while to build a music room in your brain big enough to really be able to access that stuff quickly. And you've also got all the dexterity issues. The left hand's doing one thing, the right hand's doing another. And if you're trying to read your music all at the same time, you just become overwhelmed. What you want to do typically, the very first step is to memorize everything. So you know what you're trying to do without that distraction between you and the task at hand. And then typically too with guitar, it's usually easier for most people to deal with one aspect at a time. Once they've memorized it, maybe just go through what the left hand's doing. Get it used to your brain focused on that and getting your dexterity together. Then after you've got that, then go to the right hand and deal with the rhythms. It's just too overwhelming to have all that stuff coming at you all at once when you're still a beginner.
So one thing at a time, you isolate the piece you're trying to learn, do that, get good with that. It's fascinating. A couple months ago, we had one of the top coaches in the world doing executive coaching, Marshall Goldsmith, on the show, Randy. Mm-hmm. He said the exact same thing. He said one thing, focus on one, whether it's a Fortune 500 CEO learning a skill on how to give feedback effectively or learning guitar, one thing at a time. Don't try to do 6 or 7 things because the brain just doesn't work that way.
Once you've mastered it and you are a master of the instrument, then that's not so critical. But when you're still at the learning stage, it's critical that you do one thing at a time.
All right, number 3 is you have to practice. Now, this may seem obvious, but when you and I first had our first lesson together, here's how I envisioned that this would work. You'd show up every whatever Tuesday we normally meet. We'd have our half-hour session. And then next Tuesday, you'd show up and we'd have a half-hour session again. And then over the course of 6, 7, 8, 9 months, that I just get a lot better at guitar. And I don't know, after you left here the first day, I don't think I told you this before, I didn't process the fact that I actually need to do some practicing between those lessons, that the lesson time is actually pretty minimal compared to the time investment that I need to put in on the guitar practice. Is that something that a lot of people struggle with that time investment that's needed?
I think a lot of people, it's hard to make a generalization, but a lot of people don't, when they first first go into the whole thing, don't have any idea how much time that they're really going to have to put into it over an extended period of time to make any noticeable progress. I think a lot of times they just don't make that connection at the beginning. But there's a lot of things that people learn in life, and a lot of them are quick to learn. Some take a lot longer. But playing a musical instrument, as far as my own personal experience is concerned, takes longer to master than anything I've ever dealt with. And you have to be willing to put that time in, and you have to do it consistently, or you'll get nowhere.
Well, that's one of the other things that I've discovered too. In fact, our 4th point here, find a specific time to practice. You and I had talked about this early on of, find a time of day specifically to practice. And I think at one point you said specifically for adults, this is really,
Yes.
really helpful.
Yes.
Adults trying to learn an instrument. Why the specific time? What's helpful with that? Because I kind of know, but I'm curious.
It gets back to what I was talking about earlier about the habits. It's so easy when you're an adult. You have so many responsibilities and so limited time compared to kids. Kids typically do better for other reasons. Their brains are still developing. They learn more quickly than adults typically. But the other thing is they have a lot more free time. Adults have a lot more responsibilities. And it's very easy for several days to go by and you legitimately just didn't literally have time to pick up your instrument. However, if you can make up a little deal with yourself, and everybody's different as far as what their lifestyle and their schedule is. But if you can just find, if you can pick out a certain time of day that works consistently for you, and then stick to that for just give it a week, do it every day for a week, you will probably be able to get into that groove and keep that going. And if you don't make that effort, a week can go by and nothing ever happens. And then now you've created a negative habit. It makes it easier and easier not to go back to the guitar.
I am pretty stunned how bad my willpower is on this. Like if I just try to rely on, I'll get it later tonight or I'll do it at some point. I am so bad. Like you would think 10 or 15 minutes a day. How hard can that be to find 15 minutes in a day? And I'm colossally awful at that when I don't actually set the time to do it consistently over a few days. Then I'm great. It's amazing.
You have 2 small children and you have a career.
Yeah.
And you're married. I mean, it's very easy. I mean, all of those things are more important than learning to play the guitar, and they all take an incredible amount of time and energy. So if you don't specifically set aside and make that little deal I was talking about with yourself that, okay, every day at this time, I'm going to go put in at least 15 minutes, it's very easy to get sidetracked.
One thing you've taught me is you don't need to master something before you go on to the next thing. Your style of working with me is you'll often introduce a song. We'll work on it, especially at the beginning. And then we do a few things with it and we kind of move on to the next thing, sometimes pretty quickly, not necessarily learning the whole song or learning every aspect of the song. What's the reason for approaching it that way of approaching different types of music or different types of experiences?
Well, there's a couple things. The main thing is just that when you're a beginner, I'm presenting you, or a relative beginner anyway, wherever in that end of the spectrum, it's really not realistic that you're going to be able to perform and perfect a song in its entirety. I'm looking at the nuts and bolts in the song. There's certain elements that I'm trying to get you to work on that's going to help you, that are going on in that song. And just by working on those alone, that's good enough, because if you master certain elements that I'm trying to get across to you that are required in a given song, the fact that whether you can perform the song perfectly or not really isn't relevant. And if we were to stay on a song, a beginner, very difficult for a beginner to do that, to master a whole song in its entirety. We might be on one song for a year until your skills are up to that point where you could do that. And then the other aspect is, you're going to lose interest. You're going to start getting bored. You're doing the same song over and over, whereas we can keep the learning process going by going to other songs. Now you've got something novel, something new coming at you. It's just fresher. It makes it more fun that way.
So part of this is just an element of trying to think of like, what are you trying to accomplish when you're learning something new? Like, what's the end result, which is learning the skills, not necessarily learning that song.
Exactly.
But also keeping it fun. And like the motivation level too is like a big thing. And I'm sure you see this where someone, it's just not fun anymore and then they're done.
Most of my students, if they stay on one song for more than 2 weeks, they start getting the squirms. They're begging for something new. And we just move along. Eventually, you're going to get to the point, or any student's going to get to the point, though, where they can master a song in 1 week. But usually we're talking about, depending on the difficulty of the song, at least a year or 2 in.
Something I've learned from you around that, too, is you don't have to like something to learn something from it. And there's so many applications for that in life and in leadership and professional development. But that's something I've reminded myself of when you've brought songs that maybe weren't the things that I would necessarily have picked, although you always do ask me that. Is there a way that you've done that when you've just learning skills or you're helping a student learn skills, maybe something that's not even something they like per se, but just help them to get focused on like, what's the skill they're trying to learn in that?
It's always easier if my students are the ones who suggest the song specifically that we work on, because number one, they're familiar with it. That helps. They obviously love the song. They should be a little bit more motivated to work on it. But I'll tell you what, I've got a lot of students who I force feed every week. I'll ask them, I give them that opportunity, and I say, is there something that you would like to request? No, whatever you want to bring. And it doesn't really matter. I'm presenting things in a certain order. I know the nuts and bolts of how to play the guitar and how the process should unfold, as far as we got to start it here, then we go to there, we go to from A to B to C. And it really doesn't matter what the context is, as long as those elements are involved in whatever you're working on. You're still gonna learn from it.
So figure out what it is you're trying to learn, whatever the situation is or the skill you're trying to learn. Figure out what are the things you can learn that from, and it doesn't sometimes even, it's not even as important what that is, as long as it's helping you to develop that ultimate.
You're going to be able to, whatever those skills you pick up, you're going to be able to take that and apply it toward other things down the road that you may like a lot better. It all adds up in the end. So interesting.
All right, so something else I've learned here now, I think the 7th point is consistency beats clock time. And I wrote this down because I remember you telling me that if I was if you add it up, like, let's just say it's 15 minutes a day over the course of a week, I don't know what that is, a little under 2 hours, that spending the 15 minutes a day is way better than just blocking 1 2-hour time block, like on a Saturday afternoon, and practicing for 2 hours and then not touching the guitar for another 6 days. Why is it that's the way to do it?
Because when you're first starting off, your skill levels are so primitive that if you sat down and spent any amount of time, whether it's 15 minutes or 2 hours, you didn't really get very far that day. This is as a beginner. Mm-hmm. By doing it every day, you're reinforcing what you did the day before, and you're gaining momentum through the week by doing that. If you just sit down once a week and do something, by the time you sit down with it again a week later, whatever you gained is gone. It just goes bye-bye. You need that constant reinforcement, ideally every day. And you just build upon the skills. And it's not so much knowledge with guitar at that point, it's skills. You're developing skills that are it's very difficult to do. And if you can do that every day, you're building on that. If you don't, by the time you pick up the guitar again, whatever that time you put in prior it was basically for nothing.
We talk about almost the exact same thing at Dale Carnegie. The difference between having knowledge, but then practicing and actually having the real skill, mm-hmm. is that you might know something. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff I know about guitar, but I can't actually do.
Exactly.
Or at least I can't do it in any way that would be like nice to listen to or quick. And so it's really interesting how it's like that's just a human reality of our biology, is like just a little bit at a time, so you don't forget it and you don't lose it. And
you build on it. That's the thing. You're reinforcing every day. You sit down and do it again. You're locking in what you did the day before, but everything's getting a little bit easier because of that as you can continue to progress, and you can add to it. Whereas if you just do this sporadically, all you're going to do is get yourself back to where you were, the skill level a week prior that you got to.
Oh, interesting.
You're not building. You're not making much progress.
It's kind of like, I think about this in relation to my work too, Randy, professionally, is that people are like trying to get their speaking skills more effective, is if they just put all their energy toward one big conference or one big speaking engagement 6 months from now and work toward that without speaking on a regular basis each week, or maybe even daily in their workplace or in their industry, that it's so much better if they do a little bit over time to get to that point. And
I think it applies to a lot of things. Yeah. I could see that. Yeah.
Fascinating. All right. So 8th point here, don't beat yourself up for falling off the wagon or falling behind. So I mentioned that because I beat myself up all the time when I haven't practiced or haven't done something as much as I'd like between sessions. You have never come in and said to me, oh, wow, why didn't you practice this more this week? Or you've never given me that. You may have been thinking that, but you haven't given me that negative reinforcement. What's, how do you handle that with students? Because you must know. I mean, you must know how much someone's practiced just
I know
based
exactly what they've done during the week.
Yeah.
It's very obvious to me.
Yeah.
First of all, you're paying me for my services. It ends there. Now I'm here and I will do everything I possibly can for you or any of my students. But everybody's different. And I have some students who want to be rock stars ASAP. I have other people who just want to dabble in the whole thing. And who am I to impose my standards on them? I make suggestions so they can maximize the progress as quickly as possible. That's the whole idea. That's my whole focus with my lessons. But I respect the fact that a lot of people, for whatever reasons, they reserve the right to go as slowly or as quickly as they want about all this. There's nothing I can do other than make suggestions. I can't be here and force people to practice. So I don't take that home with me.
Boy, isn't that a lesson for leadership? My goodness. I mean, how often I see people and past clients trying to do things, trying to make people do things that they're just not ready for or just not built for whatever reason.
Yeah, there's a myriad of reasons, and I'm just not even going to go there. I just say, the way I look at it is, well, that's their business. Who am I to impose my values on them? I'm here to help them, and I'm pointing out to them how to maximize their learning curve. But if they choose to do it some other way, there's not much I can do about that, and I don't get emotional about it.
My 9th lesson from, actually, I picked this up on a webinar a few months ago. I was watching a webinar and it turned out the guy was a guitar player and he wasn't about guitar, but he just said, one of the principles he learned early on from an instructor was even if you don't have the time, for whatever reason, you don't make the time that day to pick up your instrument or practice, put it somewhere where it's close to you or at least to stop and touch the strings. And for him, that was his reminder that I didn't pick this instrument up today, but I'm touching the strings and I'm a guitar player because mentally, at least, I made a connection today to this instrument. Is that something that you find is that helpful for people to make that mental connection of even if I didn't necessarily do anything, that I spent at least a minute touching it or something like that?
I like that concept just because I think most people aren't going to leave it at just touching the strings. If you get the guitar out and you get, it's like food. It's like there's something that you've been meaning to eat because it's going to spoil in the refrigerator, but you know it's there, but in a couple of days it's going to be spoiled and you're going to have to throw it away. But if you go get it out, you're probably going to eat it. And if you go to the extent where you've actually got the guitar out and you're touching the strings, I think in most cases you're going to actually pick up the guitar and start playing it at some point.
Yeah. Because so with the guitar, it's so easy to just throw it in the closet and it
out of sight, out of mind.
Out of sight, out of mind.
And a little harder with that negative habit thing can kick in, like I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
2 days turns into 3. You didn't see the guitar, but if you're actually picking up the guitar and touching those strings, more than likely, you're not going to stop at just touching the strings. Yeah. You're probably going to actually play it a little bit.
A little harder to throw a piano in the closet, but
hard to get away from that piano.
It is, for better or worse. So I've got my guitar in my office. It's actually right next to us as we're recording in the studio. And so even when I don't pick it up or even don't touch it, it's right there. It's reminding me all the time. And for better or worse, that's keeping me accountable for moving forward on it. All right, so number 10, get back on when you fall off the horse. This has been an important principle for me to remember. And like you said, career, small children, all those things, there might be a couple of days that go by where practice doesn't happen. I can spend a lot of time beating myself up over that, or I can just spend that 5 minutes and get back on the horse. And when I found that I just spend 5 minutes and get on and start doing something, it's like it comes back to me quick and all of a sudden I'm right back in the pattern. But if I spend the time worrying about like what I didn't do, then it's like a bad loop.
You've got all the time in the world to play your guitar, and there's always going to be things that get in the way. It's kind of like dieting. People who are trying to lose weight. If you may hit a spell where you don't do so well for a few weeks. So what? You still got the rest of your life. It's not like there's an end line where you didn't get there in time and now it's all over with. You've got time is your friend. Is time moves forward. All you have to do, like you mentioned, getting back on the horse, all you have to do is get back and start getting into the habit of doing the right things, just like eating the right things, whatever the situation is. And time will take care of that. You're going to get the time in over the next, it takes years to learn an instrument. Just because you missed out on a couple of weeks here or there, it's very insignificant.
When you first came for the first lesson, one of the things you said is it would take a few months to figure me out. You said with all your students, it takes a few months to kind of figure them out. I'm curious. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this question, but what have you figured out, if anything, about me so far? And what have we been going 3-4 months now? What have you figured out about my learning style, or just general?
I'm sorry. What I really meant, I don't think you really understood that when I said that at the time.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as deep as you're thinking. The reason I said that, I only say it to people, is because you told me you had played guitar previously. When I said that, usually when I get involved with a new student who's had some experience, they're all going to be different. Some of them, a lot of experience, some less. Maybe you forgot a lot, whatever. It's always different. But whatever the case is, it's impossible for me to figure out really where you are musically, and not just what you could specifically do on a guitar today to show me, but how your brain is arranged. Everybody who learns an instrument, whether they just started off by singing, whatever the process is, whatever their experience is, music is more something about your brain than it is knowing to do with what your fingers are going to do. When you learn, a lot of people think that, if I knew what to do with my fingers, where to place them, I could be a musician. No, it's all about how your brain develops and how you process sounds and the actions that are involved in making music. And what I said that was, it's a pretty complex thing. It usually takes me about a month to figure out where your brain's at, how much it's developed. Then I know the best way to approach you.
Got it.
That's what I meant.
Got it. Interesting.
It wasn't about you in general. It was just about that. I was speaking about the music room that had been created in your brain. Because I'm assuming anybody who's already had some experience, they have some music room in their brain.
Right.
Beginners typically don't, unless they've had experience on another instrument prior.
Interesting. So it's almost like just taking that first initial period of time, that 3 to 4 to 5 weeks. I mean, you and I were doing work, but really what you're doing is assessing. Yes. You're thinking through like, okay, where is he at?
Because that's critical to me to know where I'm starting from. What I'm going to present you, because what I think it's appropriate for you to be working on to start making progress, is all got to start from a specific point. And when I first meet somebody like you who's already had experience, I have no idea what that point is.
Yeah.
I'm just guessing. And it usually takes me about a month, a few weeks, like you were saying, till I really zero in on it and go, okay, I know right where he's at. This is where we're beginning.
Interesting.
We have to begin from.
Yeah, because I could even, in really good faith, try to explain to you where I'm at, but I don't even have the language to know how to. Yeah, that's the
and I could have asked you. I could have taken you aside if we had the time and spent 2 hours talking to you about musical things, and it would not have been clear to me at that point in time when I first met you. But just being around you, working with you the way we have, it reveals itself to me after about a month. I see how his brain handles all this information and how he's responding to everything and what his brain's capable of collecting and analyzing the information. And again, it's a lot more about the brain than it is the hands.
Yeah, that's a great lesson for coaching and leadership too, the reminder to help us figure out where we're at. Randy, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate not only your coaching, how you approach this, but also your thoughts and your wisdom on this. Thanks so much for taking time to share it with us. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
So a little off the beaten path of most of my conversations. But the interesting thing is every time I'd have a guitar lesson, I'd write down, notes of things I was supposed to be learning guitar. And then I found myself writing down notes of things about learning. And one of the reasons I'm taking guitar is to get better at guitar, of course. But one of the other reasons is it's a reminder to me of how difficult it is to be a beginner at something. And often when I'm working with clients, that's where they are at in their skill set in many of the things we talk about on the show. And so it's such an important reminder of how difficult it is to learn a new skill and how many of these things are so true for so many of us when we're learning something new for the first time or we're struggling with it. And the people I know who are good learners, who I see as able to adapt and learn new skills and become more effective, are not people that make this easy by any means. In fact, if the things we've talked about in the show, if this kind of stuff, if learning a new skill seems easy, I would suggest you may not even really be learning. It may be something else that's positive, but it's not really learning if you're not finding you're struggling with it. That's really the essence of learning, doing something new, changing your behavior, trying to engage a new skill for the first time or second time or third time. That is a struggle. And so if you're running into the kinds of things that we've talked about on the show of struggling with making the time to practice a new skill, whatever it is, of trying to struggle through the things that you need to do and are going to help you, but you don't necessarily enjoy, or making the time, or not feeling like you're mastering something well, or getting frustrated when you fall off the horse on something. If you're running into those things, good for you. That's exactly where you're supposed to be in the learning process. It's not enjoyable. It's not fun. I don't look forward to a lot of the times I'll sit down with the guitar and start banging things out. But then it always gets better as I get into it. And I think that learning any new skill is very much like that. So if you find you're struggling with that, if you find you're hitting a lot of these realities in the learning process, good for you. The people who are the best learners I know haven't mastered getting over this. They've mastered making peace with it. They know that they're going to need to struggle with it. They know that it's going to be hard to start and easier to keep going. They know they're not going to like it. At times it's hard to be bad at something or mediocre at something for a while. But they've made peace with that enough to keep them going. And that's my hope for you. At whatever reason you're tuning into the show, whether it's to become more effective with people, improve your communication skills, become a more confident leader, that you will continue on that journey and you'll find the confidence that will get you past those difficult times. And if you take that away from today's show, then I have more than met my objective for what you'd get from this conversation. And I hope you'll join the conversation as well. If you have a comment or a question about anything that Randy and I discussed, please visit coachingforleaders.com/205. That's the best way to add into the conversation. And of course, always welcome your questions for the next Q&A show that's coming up as episode 208, always the first Monday of the month. And the best way to submit a question is to go to coachingforleaders.com/feedback, and Bonnie and I will consider your question for the next Q&A show. And while you're online, I hope you subscribe to the show if you haven't already. New episodes come every Monday, and you can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or any podcast app you use. And please, one final reminder for those of you who are finding the show for the first time or have just listened a couple times is I hope you'll join the weekly leadership guide. It delivers to your inbox on Wednesday. I write it each week. It includes my thoughts and recommendations on the best articles, podcasts, videos, books, resources that will support your development between the shows, and also includes a link every week to the full weekly show notes that's in there. So if you listen on the go like me and you're looking for things like this 10 item list that we covered today, that's always going to be on the show notes. So the best way to do that is just to go to coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. And as soon as you do, you'll get to download my reader's guide, which lists the 10 leadership books that will help you get better results from others, and brief summaries from me on the value of each of those books. It's an 11-page guide and a 9-minute video. So if you're looking for ways to improve your learning in leadership specifically. Those books are a great place to start in starting to determine how you'll change your behavior. Just go to coachingforleaders.com/subscribe, and that'll get you access to all of that. I hope you have a fabulous week. Lots of great conversations coming up in the next few weeks. And for those of you still enjoying the summer weather in the parts of the world you're in that it's still summer, have a great end of summer, and I look forward to talking with you again next week. Take care.